Los senadores demócratas están acabando con todos los testigos de Donald Trump. Personas que están testificando ante ellos. Presten atención a la senadora demócrata Slocum. Ella es de Michigan y mira por favor cuál es su mirada cuando mira a la secretaria de Seguridad Nacional de Estados Unidos. Y también conocida como desvive perros, Christine Gowen. Mira el video.
My concern is you're sending a chill down the spine of America by going after people who either have legal status or American citizens. And when my colleagues ask you about habeas corpus, and you say, literally, we can review the tape, that you believe it's a right the president has. Mm-hmm. You sat here in front of all of us and swore an oath to the Constitution. And that is not at all what habeas corpus is. It is a right that we all get, that American citizens get, that people who are in the United States legally have. So my concern is it's complete overreach. I don't think American citizens, even those who voted for Trump, believe that you should be able to just grab someone off the street, sloppy, who has the legal right to be here, and certainly an American citizen. And I just am concerned that while you say you're going after the most dangerous folks, what you're actually doing is going after folks for political reasons, right? A PhD student that's on arms is not at the top of the list.
And we're not deporting U.S. citizens, and we're not deporting people who have legal status here.
10 American citizens have been deported.
Ahora también estamos conociendo el caso de un joven de Birmania el cual quiere ser enviado a Sudán del Sur por culpa de Donald Trump. Esto violando directamente una orden emitida por un juez federal. Les aseguro que durante el video cubriremos este tema más a fondo. Una violación masiva de una orden judicial en este caso. Luego tenemos al senador demócrata Dirk Durbin, el cual está dándole una clase a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Él es el secretario del Departamento de Salud y Servicios Sociales de Estados Unidos. Este senador le da una clase a Robert, y Robert F. Kennedy Jr. no le queda otra que decir: oh, yo no sabía eso. Así que mejor les muestro el video para que lo entiendan.
But I want to remind you, on April 1st, 10 laboratory heads at National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes received their layoff notices. They were all PhDs and senior investigators. They're not administrators, whatever that might be. They were running intramural labs at NIH. If you have your way, they'll all be gone on June 2nd. Science magazine reported 25 of 320 physician researchers at NIH's Internal Clinical Center are leaving, and the number of patients treated in the hospital has been reduced by 30%. 3 grants involving ALS and dementia work at Northwestern University in Illinois have been paused. One looking at how to stop the buildup of damaged proteins, another looking at cellular mechanisms that can be drug targets. Just last week, an ALS researcher at Harvard had his grant cut that was using AI to accelerate the reversal of ALS symptoms. Brian Wallach is waiting for a cure. He is not giving up. His source of hope is this research that you unfortunately are terminating. How can we possibly address his concerns and give hope to people across the country who are suffering for so many diseases when our government is cutting back on that research?
As I said, Senator, I do not know about any cuts to ALS research, and I'm happy to meet with you.
I just read them to you.
I will have to go and talk with Jay Bhattacharya and find out what the rationale was for those cuts. I just don't know about them until you told me about them at this moment.
There are many things that concern both of us about the state of public health in America.
A continuación, les voy a mostrar a la congresista demócrata Jasmine Crockett. Aquí está su línea de preguntas en la que ella expresa cómo toda la basura de Donald Trump no es nada más que teatro político y no ayuda para nada al progreso de Estados Unidos. Yo opino que la línea de preguntas de Jasmine Crockett es brillante, así que miren el clip.
So I have some questions. The questions are going to be, is it political theater or progress? You ready? The first question is going to be, doing an executive order revoking birthright citizenship, political theater or progress?
Political theater. It doesn't help the mission of ICE.
Okay. How about revoking student visas?
It takes up the time of ICE officers and is political theater, and it takes away from the national security and public safety mission.
How about bashing car windows of people with no criminal record?
That's driven from quotas of arrests being driven by the White House. And that is politicization of ICE immigration enforcement, so it's political theater.
How about deporting people who are even citizens? That's not even deportation, but you know what I'm saying.
It's political theater, and I believe that this White House is getting the outcome, the reaction that they want and they desire.
How about arresting political opponents?
That would be political theater.
Yeah, so here's the deal. I know that you've been cut off a number of times as you have tried to give answers to various questions. Thank you so much for explaining that even this committee hearing is actually a bunch of political theater, because there's a lot of things that we could be talking about. We could be talking about the fact that we are currently in reconciliation. And while everyone else has been told to do things such as make sure that you take food out of people's mouths, make sure that you get rid of people's health care, make sure that you are harming our federal workers even more by making sure that the resources that they need to be able to do their job just kind of disappear. But at the same time, I think the way that Mr. Moskowitz figured it, it would be approximately $44,000 as it relates to a bonus for each ICE agent. Is that correct?
It's incorrect. It was 42,000.
Okay, my bad. But the reality is that we do have real problems. And I don't know how we're going to get to real solutions if we continue to just make everything about politics. As it was properly outlined by the gentleman from Florida, that was a Republican bill. And I'll be perfectly honest with you, I wasn't really a big fan of the bill myself on my side. So I know that there was a lot of conservative stuff in that bill that was going to be harmful. And with that, I am going to yield back to the gentleman from Florida. Federal law explicitly prohibits DHS from, quote, preventing a member of Congress from entering for the purpose of conducting oversight any facility operated by or for the Department of Homeland Security used to detain or otherwise house aliens, or to make any temporary modification at any such facility that in any way alters what is observed by a visiting member of Congress. It is against the law. Full stop. Separately, the court has consistently held that the speech and debate clause of the Constitution protects individual members from prosecution for legislative acts, including, quote, fact-finding, field investigations, and information gathering. The court has consistently held that the primary purpose of the speech and debate clause is to, quote, prevent intimidation by the executive and before a possibly hostile judiciary. So let's call this for what it is. This administration is criminalizing legislative oversight, and the Republicans on this committee are helping them to do so. Rep. McIver didn't engage in interference. It was ICE that engaged in interference while members of Congress attempted to conduct legitimate oversight of ICE facilities.
Ahora, también tenemos al congresista demócrata Jamie Racking. Está verdaderamente furioso. También tenemos a la administración de Donald Trump dándole $5 millones de dinero evidentemente de contribuyentes a la familia de Ashley Babbitt. Ella fue una insurrecta que no obedeció las órdenes de la policía cuando intentó irrumpir en un área de seguridad. Y ella, en conjunto de otros insurrectos, amenazaron la vida de todos los miembros del Congreso, ya sea republicanos, demócratas o independientes. Así que miren a Racking en acción en este clip.
Trump world, violent insurrectionists and cop-beating extremists are heroes. They're martyrs. They're patriots. Members of Congress performing oversight functions are criminals and insurrectionists. And veteran criminal prosecutors of January 6 felons are fired. So Donald Trump can continue to pander to his private militia of pardoned rioters and insurrectionists and a reserve army of extremists who've proven themselves willing to stand back and stand by. In 2023, then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy said, "I think the police officer did his job." Now, although Trump's new attorney general is set to give $5 million to the rioters' family, Trump has not proposed to give a penny to the more than 140 police officers injured, wounded, hospitalized, disfigured, and or disabled in their violence, and nothing to their families. He's proposed no money payments to the bereaved family of Officer Brian Sicknick, an Army veteran with 2 tours abroad who died at age 42 here on January 7th, 2021, the very next day after being brutalized by rioters. The decision to give millions of dollars to the Babbitt family and nothing to the families of the police officers who defended this Capitol, who defended us, exacerbates the insult of Speaker Johnson's continuing refusal to hang a simple plaque in honor of the officers who defended the Capitol and the Congress and the Vice President, a plaque mandated by law and now more than 2 years overdue on the West Front of the Capitol. The Speaker's stubborn refusal to respect the law is craven submission to the executive branch, to Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that the rampaging mob that he sent to Congress was made up of patriotic heroes and that the people he pardoned were, quote, hostages. Now we've got colleagues who celebrate January 6 insurrectionists actually calling for prosecution of members of the House for doing their jobs. Representative Buddy Carter called our colleagues rioters. Representative Bishop actually said this was an insurrection. I didn't know that was in his vocabulary, but this was an insurrection, and he said it was a debacle worse than 9/11.
Ahora, tenemos al congresista Jared Moskowitz, quien señala cómo la administración de Donald Trump despilfarra dinero innecesariamente, donde dicen que quieren dar $800 millones de financiamiento al ICE. El ICE es el departamento federal que se encarga de la deportación de personas indocumentadas. Prácticamente le quieren dar $42.000 por cada agente. Y Moskowitz prácticamente les dice, o sea, está bien que les quieren dar una bonificación a trabajadores federales, pero $42.000 por cada agente del ICE. Él se pregunta qué están pasando con los otros departamentos federales de los cuales han despedido a cientos de miles de personas. ¿Por qué en vez de darle bonificaciones tan grandes a personas que tal vez no lo merecen porque están haciendo actos, la verdad, poco legales en nombre de Donald Trump, no simplemente no despiden tantas personas? Sin contar que también se han encargado de dejar sin trabajo a varios veteranos. Así que mejor miren el clip para que lo entiendan.
Mr. Marino, on that topic of bonuses, just real quick, do you support ICE agents getting $42,000 worth of bonuses? There's $800 billion for bonuses. Okay. I say billion, I'm sorry, million. I apologize. $800 million in there for bonuses. Do you support that?
Yeah, what kind of bonuses are we talking about? Are we talking retention bonuses?
This is a great question, Mr. Marino. Great question. They didn't say at all in the backup. Yeah. There was no documentation at all what the bonuses were for or what it was just $800 million for bonuses. It sounded like a lot of money for federal employees for bonuses. Not that we don't want to treat our federal employees great. Of course we do. But I had suggested $500 million for bonuses, and they said, no, $500 million sounds a little better, right?
Well, look,
or zero. Are you at zero for bonuses, maybe?
I never received a $42,000 bonus.
Good, perfect. We agree. I would like
However, times are different. Recruiting is tougher. Retention is a challenge. And if that's something that it's needed for, I would support
it. So do you support those bonuses for NOAA, FEMA, the Pentagon, all of the departments, or just ICE?
I would support strategic use of retention bonuses where they were needed.
No sabría decirte exactamente qué es lo que pasa ahí, porque ni siquiera ellos dicen lo que hacen con ese dinero. Yo siento que es un fondo para poder comprar más anuncios. En mi opinión, más anuncios para Fox y para poder como tal difundir propagandas de Donald Trump. Estoy seguro que eso es lo que van a hacer con toda esa cantidad de dinero. Y siento que están usando la figura de darle dinero a los agentes del ICE como tapadera para todo esto. Porque ese dinero evidentemente va a ir dirigido directamente a la publicidad de Donald Trump. Ahora, la senadora demócrata Murray observa su línea de preguntas. Miren el clip.
You repeatedly claim that staffing and funding cuts that have been reported on publicly and even confirmed by your department staff are not happening. So either you're lying or you're not the one making the decisions.
Senator, you presided here, I think, for 32 years. You presided over the destruction of the health of the American people.
Well,
Our people are now the sickest people in the world.
Aquí también tenemos a la congresista demócrata Ninette Barragán, que en mi opinión destruyó verbalmente a Lee Zeldin, el administrador de la EPA debajo de Donald Trump. Así que miren el clip.
You just mentioned two examples. Have you or EPA lawyers actually given that to the court or used that, cited that as fraud or criminality?
Well, first off, the standard.
It's a yes or no. Have you? You're
Yes.
a lawyer.
Yes.
They have mentioned this. Which hearing was it at? Because I don't see it in the transcript that happened in the United Climate conversation. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read to you the court transcript. Can you proffer any evidence that there was illegal or evidence of abuse or fraud, that any of this was improper or unlawful? EPA lawyer, I'm certainly not suggesting any of that was illegal or improper. Okay, just yesterday, an EPA lawyer at the hearing suggested we're not accusing anybody of fraud.
Did you understand that the evidence for EPA is not to establish criminality at the agency?
Well, you're alleging criminality. You did so in a Fox News interview. You said that's what this Greenhouse Reduction Fund was.
In order to
you shouldn't be doing that if you cannot pro-offer the evidence.
But Congresswoman,
this is not Fox News. We're not going to just allow you to just make allegations here without that evidence.
Well, if this isn't a media interview, you should allow me to go through the entire list rather than just going through.
Well, unfortunately, I only have 5 minutes, and I don't have time for you to filibuster. I'm asking for very specific fraud.
Aquí también les quiero mostrar unas buenas preguntas que hizo el senador Ron White. Así que miren el clip.
You've been getting all these questions from my colleagues with respect to this $165,000 in campaign donations after the announcement that you had been nominated. Is the concern about the possibility that promises were made in exchange for that money? I just want to give you the chance to go over this with me. Did you promise any tax promoter you would help them if you got confirmed?
I can answer that with an affirmative no.
Okay. So you didn't meet with anybody when you were in town for the inauguration and promised them a private letter arrangement or something like that?
A private letter arrangement,
where you say, we're going to help you if I'm confirmed.
I haven't promised anybody a letter of any type that I can think of.
Okay.
And I was in my room for about 50 hours because I had food poisoning during the inauguration, so I didn't talk to many people.
Okay. Mr. Long, our staff investigators have on tape now the tax promoter saying you met with him at the inauguration and promised him a favorable private letter ruling. We also have on tape the White River CFO who gave you the thousands of dollars that he expects favorable treatment of these fake tribal credits. So that's why I'm so troubled by this argument you've given today that, well, you can go over to the FEC and see things. That money doesn't just fall out of the sky and land at the FEC, and that's why these taped conversations are so troubling to me.
Ahora, vayamos con la senadora Tammy Baldwin. Presten atención a lo que ella dice.
Any life-saving research.
Is it DOGE reviewing NIH funding opportunity announcements? Is it DOGE reviewing NIH grant award?
We've got administrators, we're cutting waste, we're cutting duplicative programs.
You're funding $3 billion less in biomedical research than you did a year prior.
We're spending less on administration of those programs.
3,200 fewer grants.
We're spending, well, many of the grants were terminated because they were grants that were not advancing.
These aren't grants terminated. These are grants not awarded because the panels weren't convened.
We spend 70% of the world's biomedical research out of NIH, 70%, and we're the sickest country in the world.
$18 billion or 40% from the NIH budget slow the development of new treatments and cures?
And we are the sickest country in the world. So that money has not been well spent. We've had a 38% increase in our agency, growth in our agency over the past 4 years.
I'll ask you, is funding for Alzheimer's disease research centers DEI? Because you're holding up $65 million for 14 of those centers in 9 states, including the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Is funding for cancer centers DEI? Because you're holding up $47 million in cancer center support grants at 9 cancer centers in 8 states. Is funding for rare disease research DEI? Because you're holding up $55 million for 11 rare disease clinical research network grants in 8 states. These are just a few examples, and the list goes on and on, Secretary Kennedy. I've run out of time. I yield back.
Thank you.
This is a fun game we're playing.
Mr. Secretary, let's talk about clinical
questions and to ask questions and don't give me a chance to answer them. Don't give me time to answer them.
Well, maybe in some of my questions, you can elaborate on some of that.
I sent you this statute. You've had 3 weeks to talk to the lawyers about it. So let's jump in. Mr. Long, is it illegal for the president to direct the IRS to revoke a taxpayer's nonprofit status?
In the first place, he wouldn't do that. He's not going to come to me and say that.
That's not my question, Mr. Long. Please don't start down this.
Are we on section 7212 or 7217?
I'm at 26 USC 7217. Do I need to read it to you?
Prohibits any member of the executive branch to request the IRS to conduct or terminate an audit on a taxpayer.
All righty. So is it illegal?
I'm going to follow the law. And if that's the law, yes.
Okay, but I want you, that is the law.
Yeah.
So I just want to be clear. Is it illegal for the President of the United States to instruct the IRS to remove a taxpayer's nonprofit status?
Prohibits any member of the executive branch to request the IRS to conduct or terminate an audit of the taxpayer.
Is that a yes?
I'd have to go to the lawyers at the IRS to tell me.
No, come on. You just read it.
I know, but I don't see the instance that you're speaking about in there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see.
Look, it says it shall be unlawful for any applicable person, which in this case includes the president, to request directly or indirectly any officer or employee of the Internal Revenue Service to conduct or terminate an audit or other investigation of any particular taxpayer. Is it illegal for the president to instruct the IRS to remove nonprofit status from a taxpayer?
I'm not going to have the answer that you need, and I apologize, but like I said.
Why are you not having the answer? You've had 3 weeks to consult with lawyers. The statute is about as clear as plain English.
Well, if I say I'm going to follow the law, why would you need to ask me the question?
Well, because I want to make sure that you understand what the law says. If you think follow the law means you just get to make it up on the spot, then, Bud, you don't get to be the IRS commissioner.
Y luego, por supuesto, el clip que yo considero más importante es la senadora Hassan de New Hampshire. Y miren que fue exactamente lo que dijo, porque a mí me encantó. Miren el clip.
So, Secretary Noem, what is habeas corpus?
Well, habeas corpus is a constitutional right that the president has to be able to remove people from this country and suspend their right to.
Let me stop you, ma'am. Habeas
right
corpus, excuse me, that's incorrect.
President
habeas
Lincoln
corpus,
used it.
Excuse me. Habeas corpus is the legal principle that requires that the government provide a public reason for detaining and imprisoning people. If not for that protection, the government could simply arrest people, including American citizens, and hold them indefinitely for no reason. Habeas corpus is the foundational right that separates free societies like America from police states like North Korea. As a senator from the live free or die state, this matters a lot to me and my constituents and to all Americans. So, Secretary Noem, do you support the core protection that habeas corpus provides, that the government must provide a public reason in order to detain and imprison someone?
Yeah, I support habeas corpus. I also recognize that the President of the United States has the authority under the Constitution to decide if it should be suspended or not.
It has never
Let us be clear, though,
it has never been done. It has never been done without approval of Congress. Even Abraham Lincoln got retroactive approval from Congress.
Bueno, ahí lo tienen, amigos. Como ya saben, para mí lo más importante es saber qué opinan ustedes, y me encantaría que lo pongan en los comentarios. Si a ti te gusta el contenido de política estadounidense, te encantará suscribirte a este canal. Subo videos todos los días. Mi nombre es José Alvarado, soy economista y estoy comprometido a informarte diariamente.